The letter in Jonas Lattimer's pocket had been very clear about which bride he was meant to claim. But the moment he stepped into the preparation hall behind the country chapel and saw both women standing there in their wedding finery, every word on that crumpled paper ceased to matter. "Sir, you're in the wrong place," the hall keeper said immediately, stepping forward with her hands raised as if to physically redirect him. "The Pembroke Lattimer ceremony is in the West Hall. This is the Thorne arrangement." Jonas stood motionless in the doorway, his travel pack still slung over one shoulder, dust from 3 days of hard riding coating his boots and the hem of his coat. He had ridden straight through from the veteran settlements on the far frontier, without stopping to clean himself up or rehearse what he would say when he met the woman his family had arranged for him to marry. Catherine Pembroke, daughter of a shipping merchant, suitable match for a former soldier trying to build a farm on newly opened land. He had her description memorized. Fair hair, slight build, educated in the manners expected of a merchant's daughter. The human woman standing near the window fit that description perfectly. She wore a dress of pale blue silk that caught the afternoon light, her blonde hair arranged in elaborate braids wound through with ribbon. She looked at him with polite confusion, her hands folded neatly at her waist. But Jonas was looking at the other woman. She stood a few paces behind and to the left of the human bride, partially in shadow. Her dress was simpler, a deep green wool that had been expertly tailored to her frame, which was sturdy and strong without being bulky, with the kind of solid presence that came from genuine physical work rather than decorative muscle. She was perhaps a hand shorter than Jonas himself, putting her at a very average height for a grown woman, and her skin was the rich green of summer leaves. Small tusks curved up from her lower jaw, barely protruding past her upper lip, and her dark hair was pulled back in a single practical braid. Her ears came to gentle points, just visible beneath the edges of her hair. She was not looking at him. Her eyes were fixed on something outside the window, her expression carefully neutral in a way that suggested she had learned to make herself unobtrusive in rooms like this. "I know where I am," Jonas said quietly. The hall keeper's eyebrows shot up. "Then you need to turn around, sir. Miss Pembroke is waiting for you in the other building." "Miss Pembroke," Jonas repeated, and for the first time he looked directly at the human woman by the window. She met his eyes with a slight, practiced smile that didn't quite reach her expression. "I apologize for the confusion. I was told there would be a wedding today." "There are two," the blonde woman said, her voice carrying the crisp diction of expensive tutoring. "Mine and Miss Thorne's." "You're Jonas Lattimer, I assume?" "We were not expected to meet until the ceremony itself, but I suppose given the circumstances, an introduction is not inappropriate. I am Catherine Pembroke." Jonas nodded once. Then he turned his full attention to the orc woman who had finally looked toward him, her eyes widening slightly in what might have been alarm or simply surprise. "And you are?" he asked. The orc woman blinked. "Winifred Thorne," she said, her voice lower and rougher than Catherine's, with none of the careful shaping of formal education but clear and direct nonetheless. "I'm here with Miss Pembroke as her seamstress and companion. I've been making adjustments to her dress and helping with the preparations." "Winifred," Jonas said, tasting the name. Then he crossed the room in 4 long strides, passing Catherine entirely, and stopped in front of Winifred. He shifted his pack off his shoulder and let it drop to the floor. Then he held out his hand, palm up, in the old gesture of formal offer. "Would you marry me instead?" The silence that fell over the room was so complete that Jonas could hear the distant sound of the chapel bells and the rustling of leaves outside the window. Winifred stared at him, as if he had just spoken in a language she didn't know. Her lips parted slightly, And Jonas found himself noticing details he had no business noticing in a moment like this. The faint freckles across her nose, the calluses on her fingers from years of needlework, the way her breath had gone shallow and quick. "I beg your pardon," Catherine said, and there was no warmth in her voice now, only ice. "You can't be serious," the hall keeper hissed. "Sir, you're contracted to Miss Pembroke. You can't simply decide to marry someone else on a whim." "It's not a whim," Jonas said, and he kept his eyes on Winifred. "I'm asking, will you?" "Why?" Winifred whispered. Jonas had been a soldier for 8 years before he mustered out and claimed his land grant on the frontier. He had learned to make decisions quickly, to trust his instincts when they spoke clearly, and to commit fully once a choice was made. He had also learned the difference between the kind of attraction that faded with distance and the kind that struck like lightning and left a mark. He did not have a poetic answer to give her. He only had the truth. "Because the moment I saw you, I knew," he said simply. "And I've learned not to ignore that feeling." "You're mad," Catherine said flatly. Winifred stepped back. "He's clearly had some kind of break with reason during his journey. We should call for help." But Winifred didn't step back. She was still staring at Jonas with an expression caught somewhere between disbelief and something that might have been hope if she allowed herself to feel it. "You don't know me," she said. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you're an orc woman at a human wedding, working instead of celebrating," Jonas said. "I know you made that dress Catherine's wearing, and it's beautiful work. I know you were looking out that window like you were wishing you could be anywhere else. And I know that when I walked in here and saw you, everything else stopped mattering." "That's insane," the hall keeper said. "That's not how marriage works." "Isn't it?" Jonas asked, though he didn't look away from Winifred. "I was supposed to marry a woman I'd never met based on letters and family arrangements. How is this any different, except that I'm choosing for myself?" "The contracts," Catherine said, and now her voice had gone sharp with real anger. "You signed a betrothal contract, Mr. Lattimer. My family paid for this wedding. They made arrangements, investments. You cannot simply walk away because you've decided you prefer the hired help." Jonas finally looked at her, and he saw what he had suspected from the moment he'd seen her practiced smile. Catherine Pembroke was a woman going through the motions of something she had been told to do, wearing duty like an uncomfortable garment. There was no warmth in her eyes when she looked at him, no interest, no curiosity, only irritation at having her carefully planned day disrupted. "I'll pay the penalties," Jonas said. "Whatever the contract specifies for a broken betrothal, I'll pay it, every coin." "Do you have any idea how much that will cost?" Catherine demanded. "No," Jonas admitted, "but I'll find out and I'll pay it." "I'm not trying to cheat your family, Miss Pembroke. I'm just trying to make a different choice." Winifred made a small sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "You're serious," she said. "You're actually serious." Jonas turned back to her and held out his hand again. "Completely serious." "Will you marry me, Winifred Thorne?" She looked down at his hand, then up at his face, searching for something. What she found there, Jonas couldn't say, but after a moment that felt like it lasted an hour, she slowly lifted her own hand and placed it in his. Her palm was warm and rough with old scars from needles and scissors. Her fingers were strong. Jonas closed his hand around hers carefully, aware of his own calluses from plow handles and sword grips, and felt something in his chest settle into place like a key turning in a lock. "This is a disaster," the hall keeper said faintly. Catherine stared at them both for a long moment, and then, to Jonas's surprise, she started to laugh. It was not a pleasant sound, but there was genuine amusement in it beneath the bitterness. "You know what?" she said. "Fine, take her. Take her and deal with the absolute chaos you're about to unleash. My father is going to demand blood, Mr. Lattimer, possibly literally." The contract penalties alone will bankrupt you, and that's before you factor in the social consequences of jilting a merchant's daughter for an orc. But please, by all means, follow your heart or your instincts or whatever romantic nonsense you're calling this. Catherine, Winifred said quietly, and there was something complicated in her voice. Not quite friendship, but not indifference either. You don't have to do this. You could tell them I seduced him. You could blame me. Could I? Catherine looked at her for a long moment and then shook her head. No, I don't think I will. I'm tired of pretending this is what I wanted. At least you're getting something real out of this mess, even if it destroys both of you in the process. She turned and swept out of the room, her silk dress rustling around her ankles, leaving Jonas and Winifred standing there with their hands still clasped, and the hall keeper staring at them in horror. You need to leave, the hall keeper said finally. Both of you. Before someone calls the magistrate, or worse, before Mr. Pembroke arrives and decides to settle this with fists instead of lawyers. Jonas nodded. He picked up his pack with his free hand, keeping his other hand firmly around Winifred's. Can you get your things? He asked her. Winifred blinked, as if only just now realizing what she had agreed to. My things, she repeated. I have a room at the boarding house down the road. My tools, my clothes. We'll get them, Jonas said. And then we need to find somewhere to stay while we sort out the legal mess. Somewhere far enough from here that we can think clearly. I have money saved, Winifred said, and her voice had steadied somewhat. Not much, but enough for a few weeks of room and board. If you're serious about this, if you're not going to change your mind the moment we step outside. Jonas looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the fear beneath her careful composure. She was waiting for him to laugh, to tell her it had been a joke or a momentary madness. She was braced for cruelty because she had learned to expect it. I'm not changing my mind, he said. But I need you to understand what you're agreeing to. I have a homestead on the frontier, 3 days' hard ride from here. It's rough land, barely cleared, with a cabin that's more optimistic than weatherproof. I'm a farmer now, not a soldier, but I'm a poor farmer with more ambition than skill. And now I'm going to be a farmer with debt, because I will pay whatever the Pembrokes demand. It's going to be a hard life, Winifred, harder than you probably deserve. I'm an orc woman working as a seamstress for human families who only hire me because I'm cheap and good with my hands, Winifred said, and there was iron in her voice now. I sleep in boarding houses and servants' quarters and take whatever work I can find. I've been doing that since I was 16 years old. Don't talk to me about hard lives, Jonas Lattimer. Despite everything, Jonas found himself almost smiling. Fair enough. Then let's go get your things and figure out what comes next. They left the hall together, walking quickly through the chapel grounds before anyone could stop them. Jonas was aware of stares from the few guests who had begun to arrive early, whispers following in their wake, but he kept his eyes forward and his hand around Winifred's, and he didn't slow down until they were out on the road. The boarding house was a modest 2-story building with peeling paint and a sagging porch. Winifred led him up the narrow stairs to a room that was barely large enough for a bed and a small trunk, with a single window that looked out over the street. She moved quickly, gathering her belongings with practiced efficiency. A few changes of clothes, a wooden box filled with sewing supplies, a leather pouch that clinked softly with what must have been her saved coins. Jonas stood in the doorway and watched her, and reality began to settle over him like a cold fog. He had just destroyed a contract that his family had spent months arranging. He had insulted a merchant family with connections and resources he couldn't begin to match. He had proposed marriage to a woman he had known for perhaps 10 minutes, and he had done it all based on nothing more substantial than a feeling. It should have terrified him. It should have sent him running back to the chapel to beg Catherine's forgiveness and plead temporary insanity. Instead, watching Winifred fold a worn dress with careful, precise movements, he felt nothing but certainty. "Ready?" she asked, straightening up with her trunk in her arms. Jonas took it from her before she could protest. It was heavier than he expected, packed tight with the tools of her trade. "Where do we go from here?" he asked. "There's an inn on the edge of town," Winifred said. "The Green Lady. It's not fancy, but the keeper doesn't ask questions and she doesn't care what species you are as long as your money's good. We can stay there while you figure out the contract situation." "While we figure it out," Jonas corrected. Winifred looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once and led the way down the stairs. The Green Lady was exactly what Winifred had promised. A solid, unremarkable building that smelled of old beer and wood smoke, run by a woman with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes who looked them both over once and named a price for a room without comment. Jonas paid for a week in advance from the small purse of traveling money he had brought with him, and they climbed to a room on the second floor that was barely larger than Winifred's space at the boarding house. One bed, one chair, one window. "I'll sleep on the floor," Jonas said immediately. "Don't be ridiculous," Winifred said. She set her sewing box on the chair and sat down on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. "We're supposedly getting married. People will expect us to share a bed." "We are getting married," Jonas said. "Not supposedly. And I'm not expecting anything from you that you're not ready to give. We can take this as slowly as you need." Winifred's expression softened slightly. "You really are serious about this, aren't you?" "Yes. Even though you're going to lose everything, your family's goodwill, your reputation, possibly your savings." "I don't know about everything," Jonas said. He set her trunk down and leaned against the wall, suddenly aware of how tired he was from 3 days of riding and the emotional storm of the last hour. "But yes, even though it's going to cost me. I meant what I said, Winifred. The moment I saw you, I knew." "Knew what?" Jonas struggled to find words for something he barely understood himself. "That you were the person I was supposed to meet today, not Catherine. You." Winifred was quiet for a long time. Then she said very softly, "I saw you and thought you were the most handsome man I'd ever seen. And then I thought I was a fool, because men like you don't look at women like me." "They should," Jonas said, "but they don't." Winifred looked up at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "So forgive me if I'm having trouble believing this is real. Forgive me if I'm waiting for you to wake up and realize what you've done and tell me it was all a terrible mistake." Jonas crossed the small room and knelt in front of her, bringing himself to eye level. "I'm not going to tell you that," he said. "Not tomorrow, not next week, not ever. I chose you, Winifred. I'm going to keep choosing you, but I need you to choose me back. Not out of gratitude or desperation or because you think this is your only chance. I need you to want this." Winifred reached out slowly and touched his face, her rough fingers tracing the line of his jaw with something like wonder. "I don't know if I want it," she whispered. "I don't know you well enough to want it yet, but I want to find out. Is that enough?" "It's more than enough," Jonas said. "It's a beginning." She smiled then, small and tentative but real, and Jonas felt that certainty in his chest grow stronger. They spent the rest of the day in careful, awkward conversation, learning the basic facts of each other's lives. Jonas told her about his years in the army, about the battles he didn't like to remember and the friends he had lost. He told her about mustering out and taking the land grant on the frontier, about the dream of building something solid and lasting with his own hands. He told her about the letters from his family urging him to find a wife, about the arrangement they had made with the Pembrokes, about how he had convinced himself it was the sensible choice even though nothing about it had felt right. Winifred told him about growing up in a small orc community on the edge of human territory, about learning to sew from her mother, and discovering she had a gift for it. She told him about leaving home at 16 to find work in the human cities, about the years of taking whatever job she could find, always moving, never quite welcome anywhere for long. She told him about Catherine, who had hired her 6 months ago and treated her with cool professionalism that was better than contempt but fell far short of friendship. "She's not a bad person," Winifred said, as the sun began to set outside their window. "Just a practical one." This marriage was a business arrangement for her family, and she was willing to go through with it because that's what was expected. "I don't think she would have been cruel to you, just distant." "That's not the kind of marriage I want," Jonas said. "What kind do you want?" Jonas thought about the question. "The kind my parents had," he said finally. "They fought sometimes and they didn't always agree, but they chose each other every day. When my mother died, my father looked like half of him had been torn away. That's what I want, someone who matters that much." "That's terrifying," Winifred said. "Yes," Jonas agreed. "But so is living a half-life with someone you're just going through the motions with." Winifred nodded slowly. Then she said, "We should sleep. Tomorrow we need to find out exactly what the contract penalties are going to be." Jonas made a pallet on the floor from his bedroll and spare blankets, despite Winifred's protests. He lay awake for a long time after she had blown out the candle, listening to her breathing slow and deepen, and tried to calculate how much money he might have to find. His homestead had cost him nothing but labor, but he had savings from his army years. Not much, but something. It would have to be enough. In the morning they went looking for a lawyer. The first 3 they tried turned them away the moment they explained the situation. The fourth, a man named Gerald Priest with a small office above a bakery, listened to the whole story and then leaned back in his chair and regarded them with tired eyes. "You understand that you're in the wrong here," he said to Jonas. "Legally and socially. The Pembrokes have every right to demand full compensation for the breach, and given the public nature of the insult, they're likely to demand more than the letter of the contract specifies." "I understand," Jonas said. "You have any assets beyond your homestead? Some savings?" "Maybe enough to cover a standard penalty, but I don't know what standard is in cases like this." Priest pulled out a ledger and began making notes. "The typical breach penalty for a betrothal contract of this class is 3 times the dowry offered, plus reimbursement for wedding expenses, plus damages for social harm. Given that Miss Pembroke's dowry was listed at 200 crowns, you're looking at a minimum of 700 crowns. Possibly as much as 1,000 if the Pembrokes decide to be vindictive about it." Jonas felt the blood drain from his face. 1,000 crowns. He had 60 in his savings. His homestead might be worth another 100 if he could find a buyer, but selling it would leave him with nothing to offer Winifred except poverty and promises. "I don't have that kind of money," he said quietly. "Then you're going to have to find a way to earn it," Priest said. "Or prepare for the Pembrokes to take you to court, seize what assets you do have, and possibly see you jailed for fraud. Breach of contract is a serious matter, Mr. Lattimer." "There has to be another option," Winifred said. She had been silent until now, sitting beside Jonas with her hands clenched in her lap, but her voice was steady. "Some kind of payment plan, a way for him to work off the debt over time." Priest looked at her with something that might have been sympathy. "Miss Thorne, the law doesn't care about your romance or your intentions. It cares about contracts and compensation. If Mr. Lattimer cannot pay the penalty in full, the courts will extract it by whatever means necessary." "Then I'll sell everything," Jonas said. "The homestead, my horse, every piece of equipment I own. I'll find work here in town. I'll pay them back even if it takes years." "Jonas, no," Winifred said, and when he looked at her, he saw anguish in her eyes. "You can't give up everything you worked for, not for this, not for me." "I can and I will," Jonas said. "I made a choice, Winifred. I'm not backing away from it now." Priest cleared his throat. "Before you make any dramatic decisions, let me contact the Pembroke family and find out what they're actually demanding. It's possible they'll be willing to negotiate, especially if you can demonstrate good faith by making an initial payment. I'll need a retainer to represent you. 20 crowns. Jonas counted out 20 of his 60 crowns and placed them on the desk. Priest took the money, wrote out a receipt, and told them to come back in 2 days. They left the office and walked through the town in silence. It was market day, and the streets were crowded with people buying vegetables and meat and fabric, going about their ordinary lives while Jonas's entire future hung in uncertainty. He was aware of stares following them, whispers behind hands. News of the disaster at the chapel had spread quickly. "We should leave," Winifred said quietly. "We should go back to your homestead and forget about the contract. They can't force you to pay if they can't find you." "Yes, they can," Jonas said. "They'll send debt collectors. Eventually they'll send the law. And even if we manage to hide, I won't live my life running from something I did intentionally. I broke that contract with my eyes open, Winifred. I owe the Pembrokes restitution and I'm going to pay it. Even if it ruins you, it won't ruin me. It'll just make the next few years harder than I planned." Winifred stopped walking and turned to face him, there in the middle of the crowded market street. "You could still walk away from me," she said. "Tell them it was temporary madness. Beg Catherine to take you back. You might be able to salvage something." Jonas looked at her, at this woman he barely knew who was offering him an escape from the consequences of choosing her, and felt anger stir in his chest. Not at her, but at a world that had taught her to expect so little. "I'm not walking away from you," he said, loud enough that several nearby shoppers turned to look. "I'm not changing my mind. I'm not going to wake up one day and realize I made a mistake. I chose you, Winifred Thorne, and I meant it. So please stop waiting for me to leave." Winifred's eyes went wide. Then, to Jonas's surprise, she laughed. It was a short, shaky sound, but genuine. "You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the most foolish." "Probably both," Jonas admitted. She reached out and took his hand. There in full view of the market crowd, and several people around them gasped audibly. "Then I choose you too," she said. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Jonas squeezed her hand and felt that certainty in his chest spread through his entire body, warm and unshakable. They returned to the Green Lady and spent the rest of the day planning. Jonas made lists of everything he owned and calculated what each item might sell for. Winifred tallied her own savings and offered them immediately, which Jonas refused at first and then accepted when she pointed out that if they were truly in this together, there was no point in keeping separate accounts. "We have 85 crowns between us," Jonas said, staring at the numbers. "That's not even enough to cover the base penalty, let alone the damages." "Then we find work," Winifred said. "Both of us. I can take sewing commissions. You can find labor. We save every coin until we have enough. That could take months, maybe years. Then it takes years." Winifred met his eyes across the small table. "I've been poor my whole life, Jonas. I know how to live on nothing and make it last. We'll manage." Jonas wanted to argue, to tell her she deserved better than poverty and struggle, but he saw the determination in her face and knew it would be pointless. Instead, he nodded and added another line to his list: "Find work immediately." Over the next 2 days, while they waited for Priest to contact the Pembrokes, Jonas found a job at the town's livery stable, mucking stalls and tending horses for 2 crowns a week. It was hard, unglamorous work that left him smelling of manure and sweat, but the stable master didn't care about broken betrothals or scandalous choices. He cared about whether Jonas knew his way around horses, and Jonas did. Winifred took her sewing box to every dressmaker and tailor in town, offering her services. Most turned her away without even looking at her work. The 2 who were willing to hire an orc offered insultingly low rates for piecework that would destroy her eyesight within a year. She took the jobs anyway and spent her evenings sewing by candlelight until Jonas physically took the needle from her hands and made her sleep. "You're going to ruin your eyes," he said. "We need the money," she replied. "Not at the cost of your health." They argued about it, their first real argument, both of them exhausted and worried and snapping at each other in the small room that had begun to feel like a cage. It ended with Winifred crying from frustration and Jonas holding her awkwardly, unsure what to say or do but unwilling to let her suffer alone. "I'm sorry," she whispered against his chest. "I'm just scared. I keep thinking you're going to wake up and realize this was a mistake." "It wasn't a mistake," Jonas said. He stroked her hair, feeling the strength of her against him, the solidness of her. "I promise you, Winifred, this wasn't a mistake." She pulled back and looked up at him, tears still wet on her cheeks, and then she did something that surprised them both. She kissed him. It was brief and tentative, her lips soft despite the slight awkwardness of her small tusks, and when she pulled away her eyes were wide with shock at her own boldness. "I'm sorry," she started to say, but Jonas shook his head and kissed her back, properly this time, one hand cupping her face and the other wrapping around her waist. She made a small sound of surprise, and then melted against him, her arms coming up to wind around his neck. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jonas rested his forehead against hers and tried to remember why he had been planning to sleep on the floor. "We should probably slow down," Winifred said, but her hands were still in his hair and she didn't move away. "Probably," Jonas agreed. He kissed her once more, gentle and brief, and then forced himself to step back. "But I'm glad we're not." Winifred laughed, the sound bright and free, and Jonas thought that if he spent the rest of his life working off debt and living in tiny rooms, it would be worth it for moments like this. On the 3rd day, they returned to Priest's office. The lawyer was waiting for them with a stack of papers and an expression that Jonas couldn't quite read. "I've heard from the Pembroke family," Priest said without preamble. "They're demanding the full penalty. 600 crowns for the breached dowry, 150 crowns for wedding expenses, and another 250 crowns for damages to Miss Pembroke's reputation and marriage prospects. 1,000 crowns total, to be paid within 6 months. Jonas felt the room tilt slightly. 1,000 crowns. 6 months. It was impossible. "If you cannot pay within that time frame," Priest continued, "they will pursue legal action to seize your assets and garnish any future earnings. They are also prepared to press charges of fraud if they believe you entered into the contract in bad faith." "I didn't," Jonas said. "I meant to honor it when I signed. I just changed my mind when I saw Winifred." "That may not be enough to protect you from criminal charges," Priest said. "But there is one piece of good news, if you can call it that. Miss Pembroke herself has sent a letter to her family asking them to reduce the damages claim. She's arguing that she was not actually harmed by the breach and that their reputation will suffer more from appearing vindictive than from the broken contract itself." "Why would she do that?" Winifred asked. Priest shrugged. "I don't know her reasoning. But it may help reduce the total amount if her family listens to her. I've sent a counter offer proposing a structured payment plan. 100 crowns immediately as a show of good faith, and the remainder paid in monthly installments over 2 years. We should have their response within the week. Jonas did the math quickly. 100 crowns immediately would wipe out his savings and require selling his homestead. The monthly payments would take every spare coin he and Winifred could earn for the next 2 years. But it was possible. Barely, desperately possible. "Tell them I accept those terms," Jonas said. "If they agree to them, I'll pay." Priest nodded and made a note. "I'll send word as soon as I hear back. In the meantime, I suggest you start liquidating assets and finding more stable employment than stable work. 2 years is a long time to keep up that level of payment." They left the office and walked back toward the Green Lady in silence. Jonas was calculating figures in his head, trying to make the impossible numbers work. Winifred walked beside him with her face carefully blank, and he knew she was doing the same calculations and reaching the same conclusions. "I need to sell the homestead," Jonas said finally. "I know. I'll have to find someone willing to buy it quickly, which means taking less than it's worth." "I know. And then we'll need to find work that pays better than what we're doing now, real work with steady income." "I know." Winifred stopped and turned to face him. "Jonas, listen to me. I'm not going to let you destroy your entire future for this, for me." "You're not letting me do anything," Jonas said. "I'm choosing to do it. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're throwing away everything you worked for on an impulse that's going to haunt you for years." "It wasn't an impulse." Jonas took her hands, both of them, and held tight. "I know it seemed like one. I know it looks insane from the outside. But I've spent the last 8 years of my life following orders, fighting wars I didn't choose, watching friends die for causes that didn't matter to them. And then, I spent a year breaking my back on a homestead trying to build something that was supposed to make sense, even though nothing about it felt right. When I walked into that hall and saw you, it was the first time in longer than I can remember that something felt right. Completely, undeniably right. So no, I'm not throwing away my future, I'm fighting for it, and I need you to stop waiting for me to give up." Winifred's eyes were bright with tears, but she didn't look away. "What if you're wrong?" she whispered. "What if we do all this and pay all that money and work ourselves to exhaustion, and then you wake up a year from now and realize you chose wrong?" "Then I chose wrong," Jonas said, "but I don't think I did, and I'm willing to stake everything on that." She studied his face for a long moment, searching for something. Then she nodded once and squeezed his hands. "All right, then we do this together. We sell what needs to be sold, we find work that pays, and we get through this. Together." "Together," Jonas agreed. They spent the next week in a blur of activity. Jonas rode out to his homestead and spent 3 days showing it to potential buyers, most of whom offered insultingly low prices for land that was barely cleared and a cabin that leaked when it rained. He finally found a young couple willing to pay 90 crowns for it, and he took the offer even though it was half what the land was worth. Winifred found better work through an unexpected source. Catherine Pembroke, who sent word through one of her servants that a wealthy family in the next town was looking for a seamstress willing to live on site for 6 months and pay well for the privilege. Winifred hesitated, not wanting to leave Jonas, but the pay was too good to refuse. 15 crowns a month, with room and board included. It would cut their expenses in half and bring them closer to being able to make the payments. "I don't want you to go," Jonas said when she told him about the offer. "I don't want to go either," Winifred said, "but we need the money and it's only 6 months. 6 months is a long time." "It is." She touched his face, the gesture already familiar between them. "But we'll write. And I'll come back. I promise." Jonas nodded, not trusting himself to speak. They had only known each other for 2 weeks, but the thought of being separated for half a year felt like losing a limb. Before Winifred left, Priest sent word that the Pembrokes had accepted the payment plan with one modification. They wanted 150 crowns immediately instead of 100, and they wanted the remaining 850 paid over 18 months instead of 24. It was harsher terms, but still just barely possible. Jonas sold his horse, his saddle, and most of his equipment. He walked to the bank and withdrew every coin he had saved. Combined with Winifred's savings and the money from the homestead sale, they had exactly 150 crowns. They went to Priest's office together and handed over the money. The lawyer counted it twice, wrote out a receipt, and sent a messenger to the Pembroke family confirming the initial payment. "You now owe 850 crowns over the next 18 months, Priest said. "That's approximately 47 crowns per month. Can you meet that obligation?" Jonas looked at Winifred. Together, with her new job and his stable work and whatever additional labor he could find, they might be able to scrape together that much. It would leave them nothing for savings or emergencies or any kind of life beyond bare survival, but it was possible. "Yes," he said, "we can meet it." Priest nodded and filed the papers. "Then I suggest you start immediately. The first payment is due in 30 days. Winifred left the next morning. Jonas walked with her to the coaching station and helped her load her trunk and sewing box. She looked small and alone standing beside the coach, her face carefully composed in a way that told Jonas she was fighting tears. 6 months, he said, taking her hands. 6 months, she agreed, and then we'll figure out what comes next, together. Together. He kissed her there in the coaching station, not caring who saw or what they thought, and she kissed him back with a desperation that spoke to how frightened they both were of this separation. When the coach pulled away, Jonas stood and watched until it disappeared around a bend in the road. Then he turned and walked back to the Green Lady, alone for the first time since the day he had chosen Winifred over Catherine. The next 6 months were the hardest of Jonas's life, harder even than his years in the army. He worked every job he could find, stable hand in the mornings, loading cargo at the docks in the afternoons, washing dishes at taverns in the evenings. He slept 4 hours a night and ate 1 meal a day, and sent every spare coin to Priest's office to be forwarded to the Pembrokes. Winifred's letters arrived once a week, sometimes twice. She wrote about the family she was working for, about the daughter getting married and the elaborate dress she was making, about the other servants and the small room she had been given. She wrote about missing him, about counting the days until her contract was up, about the money she was saving. Jonas wrote back when he had time and energy, which was less often than he wanted. He told her about the work, about the slow progress of the debt payments, about the town gossip he heard in the taverns. He told her he missed her. He told her he loved her, even though they had never said those words aloud to each other. It felt important to write it down to make it real. Her response came 2 weeks later. The letter was shorter than usual, just a few lines. "I love you too, keep going. We're almost there." The months crawled past. Jonas made the first payment on time, then the second, then the third. Each time he counted out the money to Priest, he felt the weight of the debt lift slightly, though the remaining balance still loomed like a mountain. In month 4, he got a letter from his family. His brother had heard about the broken engagement, about the orc woman, about the debt. The letter was not kind. It called Jonas selfish and impulsive, and accused him of bringing shame on their family name. It suggested he apologize to the Pembrokes and find a way to make things right with Catherine. Jonas read the letter once, then burned it in the fireplace at the Green Lady. He did not write back. In month 5, he ran into Catherine in the market. She was shopping with her mother, both of them dressed in fine clothes that spoke of wealth and comfort. Jonas froze when he saw her, unsure what to say or do, but Catherine simply nodded to him politely and kept walking. Her mother, however, stopped and looked him over with cold eyes. "I hope you're satisfied with your choice, Mr. Lattimer," she said. "I hope that orc woman is worth the poverty and disgrace you've brought on yourself." Jonas met her gaze steadily. "She is," he said. Mrs. Pembroke sniffed and walked away, her skirts swishing with indignation. In month 6, Winifred came home. Jonas was at the coaching station an hour before the coach was due to arrive, unable to stay away. When it finally pulled up and Winifred climbed out, his heart did something complicated in his chest. She looked tired, thinner than when she had left, but her face lit up when she saw him, and she dropped her bags and ran to him. He caught her and held on tight, breathing in the scent of her hair and feeling the solid reality of her in his arms. She was shaking, or maybe he was, or maybe both of them were. "I missed you," she said against his chest. "I missed you too," Jonas said. "So much." They stood there for a long time, just holding each other, while the other passengers collected their luggage and moved around them. Finally, Winifred pulled back and looked up at him, and Jonas saw the evidence of her own hard months in the shadows under her eyes and the new calluses on her fingers. "How much do we still owe?" she asked. 560 crowns, Jonas said. "We're almost halfway there." "And how much do we have saved?" "Nothing. Every coin has gone to the payments." Winifred nodded, unsurprised. "Then we keep going. I have another job lined up if I want it. A dress shop in town is willing to hire me on permanently. The pay is decent, and I can work from their shop instead of traveling." "You don't have to keep doing this," Jonas said. "You've already given up 6 months. If you want to leave to find something better, I wouldn't blame you." Winifred looked at him like he had said something absurd. "Leave?" "Jonas, we're engaged. Or did you forget that part?" "I haven't forgotten, but I also haven't asked you properly, not with a ring or a plan or anything resembling a future." "Then ask me now." Jonas blinked. "Here, in the coaching station." "Why not here?" Winifred said. "You asked me the first time in a wedding hall with half the town about to witness. The coaching station seems positively romantic by comparison." Despite everything, Jonas laughed. Then he took her hands and looked into her eyes and said the words he had been carrying in his heart for 6 months. "Winifred Thorne, will you marry me? Not because of a contract or an impulse or a scandalous choice, but because I love you. Because the last 6 months without you have been miserable and empty, and I don't want to live that way ever again. Because you're the person I want beside me for everything that comes next, even if it's hard and unglamorous and takes years to build into something solid. Will you marry me?" Winifred was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she said. "Yes, of course, yes. I've been yours since the moment you chose me, Jonas. I'll always be yours." He kissed her there in the coaching station, and this time there were people watching and whispering, but Jonas didn't care. Let them talk. Let them judge. He had the only thing that mattered. They collected Winifred's bags and walked back to the Green Lady together. The room felt smaller with both of them in it again, but also warmer, more complete. That night they slept in the same bed for the first time, wrapped around each other like neither of them could quite believe the other was real. The next morning they went to work. Winifred started at the dress shop, where her skills quickly made her indispensable. Jonas continued his multiple jobs, though he was able to cut back on the tavern work now that they had her income to help with expenses. Together, they brought in enough to make the monthly payments and have a little left over for food and rent, and the occasional luxury of new socks or a decent meal. The months continued to pass. 7, 8, 9. The debt shrank slowly but steadily. 37 crowns paid, then 48, Then 62 when Winifred got a bonus for completing a particularly difficult commission. In month 10, Jonas got a letter from Catherine. It was brief and unexpected. "Mr. Lattimer, I wanted you to know that I am engaged to be married. His name is Thomas Webb, and he is a clerk in my father's shipping office. We have known each other for years, and I have recently come to realize that I care for him deeply. I am writing to tell you this because I wanted you to know that your choice, while disruptive, ultimately freed me to make one of my own. I hope you and Miss Thorne are well. C. Pembroke." Jonas showed the letter to Winifred that evening. She read it twice, then smiled. "I'm glad for her," Winifred said. "She deserves to be happy." "So do we," Jonas said. "We are happy, aren't we?" Jonas looked around the tiny room they had been living in for nearly a year. He thought about the debt that still hung over them, the months of work still ahead, the uncertainty of where they would live or what they would do once the payments were finally finished. And then he looked at Winifred, at the woman who had chosen to stay with him through all of this, and felt that certainty settle in his chest again. "Yes," he said, "we are." In month 12, they made a payment of 50 crowns and priest informed them that the Pembrokes had sent a note of acknowledgement. The family was satisfied with the consistency of the payments and had stopped pursuing additional damages. They were, in priest's dry words, willing to let the matter conclude once the debt is satisfied. "We're going to make it," Winifred said that night, lying in bed with her head on Jonas's chest. "We're actually going to pay it all off. Did you doubt it?" Jonas asked. "Every single day," she admitted. "I kept waiting for something to go wrong, for you to get hurt and not be able to work, for me to lose my job, for the Pembrokes to change their minds and demand more." "I worried about all those things too," Jonas said, "but we made it through anyway." "Because you're stubborn." "Because we're stubborn," Jonas corrected. "You worked just as hard as I did, Winifred, maybe harder." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "When this is over, when the debt is paid, what do you want to do?" Jonas had been thinking about that question for months. "I want to find a new piece of land," he said slowly. "Something small, something we can afford. I want to build a cabin with you, plant crops, maybe keep a few animals. I want to make a life that's ours, not something I'm borrowing or working toward, just ours." "That sounds perfect," Winifred whispered. "And I want to marry you properly," Jonas added. "Not in a grand hall with 100 witnesses, somewhere small and quiet with just us and maybe a few friends. I want to make promises to you and mean them without any contracts or penalties hanging over our heads. We could do it after the debt is paid," Winifred said. "We could get married as a way of celebrating being free. Would you want that?" "I would want that more than anything." Jonas kissed the top of her head and held her closer. "Then that's what we'll do." The final months of the debt passed more quickly than Jonas expected. He and Winifred had fallen into a rhythm of work and saving, of small pleasures stolen between long hours. They cooked simple meals together in the Green Lady's shared kitchen. They walked through the town on rest days, hand in hand, ignoring the stares. They made love quietly in their small room and talked about the future they were building one coin at a time. In month 16, Jonas was offered a permanent position at a nearby farm. The owner had seen him working at the livery and asked if he would be interested in managing the property's horses and doing general maintenance. The pay was better than anything Jonas had been able to cobble together from multiple jobs, and it came with a small cottage on the property. Jonas took the job immediately. He and Winifred moved into the cottage, which was barely larger than their room at the Green Lady but had the immense luxury of being theirs. Winifred set up a sewing corner by the window. Jonas built a small shelf for their few books and possessions. It felt like a real home for the first time in over a year. In month 17, they made the second-to-last payment. Priest counted the money and nodded with what might have been approval. "One more month," he said. 47 crowns and you're free of this." "I can hardly believe it," Winifred said. "You should," Priest said. "Most people in your situation would have given up or fled. The fact that you stuck it out and paid every installment on time is remarkable. The Pembrokes have noticed, for what it's worth. I received a letter from Mr. Pembroke last week saying he was impressed by your integrity." "That's generous of him," Jonas said, though he found it difficult to feel charitable toward the family that had extracted such a high cost for his choice. "It is," Priest agreed. "And it means that once this final payment is made, the matter will be considered fully resolved with no lingering consequences." The 18th month arrived. Jonas and Winifred had saved the final 47 crowns weeks in advance, both of them unwilling to risk any last-minute emergency that might delay their final payment. On the first day of the month, they walked to Priest's office together and placed the money on his desk. Priest counted it slowly, wrote out a receipt, and then pulled out a formal document. "This is a letter of satisfaction," he said. "It states that the debt between you and the Pembroke family has been paid in full, and that all parties consider the matter concluded. Once I file this with the court and send a copy to the Pembrokes, you will be legally free of any obligation." Jonas took the document and read it over carefully. It was dry, legal language, but to him it read like poetry. Debt satisfied. Obligation fulfilled. Matter concluded. He signed it. Winifred signed it as a witness. Priest notarized it and promised to file it that afternoon. When they left the office, Jonas felt lighter than he had in a year and a half. The weight that had been pressing on his shoulders since the day he chose Winifred had finally lifted. He was free. They were free. "We did it," Winifred said, and her voice was full of wonder. "We did," Jonas agreed. She turned to him right there on the street and threw her arms around his neck. "We're free. We can get married now. We can start our life." "We already started our life," Jonas said, holding her tight. "But yes, let's make it official." They spent the next week planning a wedding that was as different from the one Jonas had been supposed to have as it was possible to be. No grand hall, no formal invitations, no expensive dress or elaborate feast. Just a simple ceremony in the small church on the edge of town, with the priest who had agreed to marry them despite their unconventional circumstances. Winifred made her own dress from fabric she had been saving for months, a deep green that matched her skin and brought out the warmth in her dark eyes. It was simple and elegant, fitted to her strong frame with the kind of precision only a master seamstress could achieve. Jonas borrowed a suit from the farmer he worked for and spent an evening polishing his boots until they shone. They invited a handful of people: the innkeeper from the Green Lady, who had never judged them; the farmer and his wife, who had given Jonas steady work; the owner of the dress shop where Winifred worked; Priest, who had guided them through the legal maze; and, to Jonas's surprise, Catherine Pembroke, who sent a note saying she would be honored to attend. On the day of the wedding, Jonas stood at the front of the church and watched Winifred walk toward him. She carried no flowers, wore no veil, but she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. When she reached him and took his hands, he saw tears in her eyes and knew his own eyes were damp as well. The priest kept the ceremony short and simple. He talked about commitment and choice, about building a life together through work and faith. He asked them to make their vows. Jonas spoke first. "Winifred, I promise to choose you every day for the rest of my life. I promise to work beside you, to stand with you, to be honest with you even when it's hard. I promise to love you not just in the easy moments but in the difficult ones. You're my home, my partner, my heart. I choose you." Winifred's voice shook when she responded, but her words were clear. Jonas, I promise to trust you, even when I'm scared. I promise to build our life with you, whatever that life looks like. I promise to be your partner in everything, your equal, your friend. You saw me when no one else did, and you chose me when it cost you everything. I will spend the rest of my life choosing you back. The priest smiled and pronounced them married. Jonas kissed his wife there in the small church, and the handful of witnesses applauded. The celebration afterward was modest. They gathered at a tavern for a simple meal of roasted chicken and vegetables, with a small cake that the innkeeper had baked as a gift. Catherine Pembroke came and offered her congratulations, shaking hands with both of them with genuine warmth. I'm glad this worked out for you, she said. Both of you. And thank you, Mr. Lattimer, I mean that. If you hadn't walked away, I might never have had the courage to choose for myself. Call me Jonas, he said. And I'm glad things worked out for you too. Catherine smiled and left shortly after, heading back to her own life and her own future. As the sun began to set, Jonas and Winifred walked back to their cottage hand in hand. They had no grand honeymoon planned, no distant destination waiting. They had only each other, and the small home they had built together, and the promise of tomorrow. Inside the cottage, Winifred lit the lamps and Jonas added wood to the fire. They stood together in the warm glow and looked around at the space that was truly theirs now, earned through months of hard work and sacrifice. I don't regret it, Jonas said quietly. Any of it. The debt, the work, the struggle. I would do it all again if it meant ending up here with you. I know, Winifred said. She leaned against him, solid and warm. I believe you now. It took me a long time, but I finally believe it. What changed? Watching you work yourself to exhaustion for 18 months to pay for choosing me, Winifred said. That's not something you do on impulse or out of temporary infatuation. That's something you do when you mean it. Jonas wrapped his arms around her and rested his chin on top of her head. I meant it from the beginning, he said, but I'm glad you finally believe it. They stood there for a while, just holding each other. Then Winifred pulled back and looked up at him with a small, mischievous smile. So, she said, what do we do now? Now, Jonas considered. Now we start the next part, the part where we're just a married couple living our life. That sounds remarkably ordinary. Good, Jonas said. I think I'm ready for ordinary. Winifred laughed and kissed him, and Jonas kissed her back with the easy certainty of someone who had finally found his home. The next few months settled into a comfortable routine. Jonas continued working at the farm, managing the horses and helping with the seasonal labor. Winifred took on commissions from her shop and began building a reputation as the best seamstress in the region, orc or human. They saved money slowly, carefully, with an eye toward buying their own small piece of land someday. Word of their story had spread through the town and beyond. Some people still whispered and stared when they walked past. Others began to see them simply as Jonas and Winifred, the couple who lived in the cottage by the farm and worked hard and kept to themselves. One afternoon, nearly a year after their wedding, a young man knocked on their door. He was human, maybe 20 years old, and he looked nervous. Mr. Lattimer, he said when Jonas answered. My name is Peter Marsh. I'm engaged to be married next month, and I was wondering if I could ask you something. Jonas invited him in. Winifred brought tea, and they sat around their small table while Peter gathered his courage. My fiancée is an orc woman, he said finally. Her name is Rose, and she's the daughter of a blacksmith in the next town over. My family doesn't approve. They've told me that if I go through with the marriage, they'll disown me and cut me off financially. I've been trying to decide what to do, and someone told me your story, about how you chose Miss Thorne even though it cost you everything. I wanted to know if you think I should do the same thing. Jonas exchanged a glance with Winifred. Then he said carefully, "I can't tell you what to choose, Peter. That's something only you can decide. But I can tell you that the cost was real. I spent 18 months working multiple jobs and living in a single room and watching every coin. I gave up land I had claimed and saved for. I alienated my family and damaged my reputation. It was the hardest thing I've ever done." Peter's face fell. "So you're saying I shouldn't do it?" "No," Winifred said firmly. "He's saying you need to understand what you're choosing. If you love this woman, if you truly want to build a life with her, then the cost is worth it. But you can't go into it expecting it to be easy or romantic or for love to magically solve all your problems. It's work. Hard, unglamorous work. Are you prepared for that?" Peter thought about it. Then he nodded. "I am. I love her. I want to marry her. I just needed to hear from someone who had done it that it was possible." "It's possible," Jonas said. "It's difficult and expensive and people will judge you, but it's possible. And if you choose her, you need to keep choosing her every day, even when it's hard." "Especially when it's hard," Winifred added. Peter left looking more determined than when he had arrived. Jonas closed the door behind him and turned to find Winifred looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "What?" he asked. "Nothing," she said. "Just thinking about how far we've come. A year ago we were scraping together money for debt payments. Now we're giving advice to young couples about how to navigate forbidden romance." "Life is strange," Jonas agreed. "And good," Winifred said. She crossed to him and slipped her arms around his waist. "Strange and good." Jonas held her and looked around their small cottage, at the life they had built together through determination and stubbornness and love. It wasn't the life he had imagined when he rode out to meet his arranged bride all those months ago. It was better. 2 years after their wedding, Jonas and Winifred finally saved enough to buy a small piece of land on the outskirts of town. It was only 5 acres, but it was theirs, paid for with money they had earned together. They spent the summer building a cabin with their own hands, with help from friends they had made in the community. The cabin was simple. 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, a porch that faced south to catch the sun. But it had solid walls and a roof that didn't leak, and when they moved in their few possessions, it felt like a palace. Winifred set up her sewing corner by the largest window. Jonas built a small barn for the chickens they planned to keep and plowed a garden plot for vegetables. They planted an apple tree in the front yard, knowing it would take years to bear fruit, but wanting to put down roots anyway. On their 3rd anniversary, they sat on their porch and watched the sun set over their land. Winifred had her head on Jonas's shoulder, and he had his arm around her, and neither of them spoke for a long time. "You ever think about what would have happened if you had chosen Catherine?" Winifred asked finally. Jonas considered the question. "Sometimes," he admitted. "I think I would have had an easier life in some ways. More money, more stability, less struggle. But I wouldn't have had you," Jonas said. "And that would have made all the ease and stability meaningless. I made the right choice, Winifred. I know that as certainly now as I did the day I walked into that hall. I'm glad," she said softly, "because I can't imagine my life without you in it now." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned pink and gold. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called. The chickens clucked softly in their new coop. The world felt peaceful and complete. "Jonas," Winifred said after a while. "Yes, I'm pregnant." Jonas went very still. Then he turned to look at her, his heart suddenly pounding. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," Winifred said. She was smiling, but there were tears in her eyes. "I've known for a few weeks, but I wanted to be certain before I told you. We're going to have a baby." Jonas pulled her into his arms and held her tight, feeling a joy so intense it was almost painful. A baby. A child who would grow up in this cabin they had built together, on this land they had earned through years of work and sacrifice. A child who would be both human and orc, a living symbol of the choice he had made and the life they had built. "I love you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you so much, Winifred." "I love you too," she whispered back. They held each other as the sun finished setting and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The road ahead would bring new challenges, Jonas knew. Raising a child was never easy, and raising a half-orc child in a world that still harbored prejudice against orcs would be even harder. But they would face those challenges the same way they had faced everything else, together, with stubborn determination and love. The baby was born the following spring, a healthy boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's green skin. They named him William, after Winifred's father, and Thomas, after Catherine's new husband, as a gesture of goodwill and gratitude for the role she had played in their story. William Lattimer grew up strong and curious, running through the apple orchard that had finally begun to bear fruit and helping his parents tend their growing farm. Jonas taught him to work with his hands, to care for animals, to value honesty and integrity above ease or comfort. Winifred taught him to sew and cook, to appreciate beauty and craftsmanship, to be proud of all parts of his heritage. The town that had once whispered about Jonas and Winifred's scandalous marriage gradually accepted their small family. Children who had been taught to fear, orcs grew up playing with William and learned that people were people, regardless of skin color or tusks. Couples who struggled with their own forbidden romances came to Jonas and Winifred for advice and found hope in their story. 5 years after William was born, Winifred gave birth to a daughter. They named her Grace, and she had her mother's dark hair and her father's smile. The cabin, which had once seemed spacious for 2, now felt perfectly sized for 4. Jonas built an addition when Grace was 2, adding a loft where the children could sleep and giving Winifred a proper workroom for her sewing. The business she had built through word of mouth and sheer skill had grown to the point where she was training apprentices and taking commissions from wealthy families 3 towns away. Jonas's farm had expanded as well, now including dairy cows and a larger garden that supplied vegetables for sale at the town market. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable. More importantly, they were happy. On their 10th anniversary, Jonas and Winifred returned to the small church where they had been married. The priest who had performed the ceremony had retired, replaced by a younger man who had heard their story and asked to meet them. "I wanted to thank you," the new priest said. "Your marriage has changed this community in ways you might not realize. When I arrived here 3 years ago, there were still laws on the books prohibiting marriages between humans and orcs. Those laws have been repealed, in large part because your example showed people that such marriages could work." Jonas and Winifred looked at each other in surprise. They had been so focused on building their own life, raising their children, managing their farm, that they hadn't paid much attention to the larger social changes happening around them. "We didn't do anything special," Winifred said. "We just lived our lives." "Sometimes that's enough," the priest said. "Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply exist and be happy and refuse to let the world tell you that your love is wrong." After they left the church, Jonas and Winifred walked through the town holding hands. It was market day, and the streets were crowded with people buying and selling and going about their business. Jonas saw several other mixed couples now, human and orc, some of them openly holding hands like he and Winifred were. "Did we really do that?" Winifred asked quietly. "I think we helped," Jonas said. "But I think Catherine helped too, by not making our lives miserable when she could have. And Peter Marsh helped by having the courage to make his own choice. and every other couple who decided love was worth the cost. Change happened slowly, one choice at a time. They stopped at the market and bought fresh bread and cheese for dinner. The baker, a middle-aged woman who had been one of the first to accept their relationship, threw in an extra loaf as an anniversary gift. 10 years, she said, shaking her head in wonder. And you two still look at each other like newlyweds. That's rare, you know. Most people lose that spark after a year or two. Most people didn't have to work as hard for their marriage as we did, Jonas said. Maybe that's the secret, the baker mused. Maybe the things we work hardest for are the things we value most. Walking home with their purchases, Jonas thought about that. He thought about the 18 months of debt payments, the years of hard labor, the sacrifices they had both made. He thought about the broken contracts and alienated family and social stigma they had endured. And then he looked at Winifred walking beside him. At the comfortable way, their hands fit together after 10 years of holding on, at the life they had built through sheer, stubborn determination. And he knew the baker was right. The things they worked hardest for were the things they valued most. William met them at the gate of their property, running with 7-year-old energy and shouting about something he had found in the orchard. Grace toddled after him on 5-year-old legs, determined not to be left behind. Jonas scooped her up and carried her on his shoulders while Winifred listened to William's excited story about a bird's nest he had discovered. That evening, after the children were asleep in their loft and the dishes were cleaned and the chickens were locked up for the night, Jonas and Winifred sat on their porch and watched the stars come out. "You remember what you said to me the day we met?" Winifred asked. "I said a lot of things that day," Jonas replied. "Most of them probably foolish." "You said you knew the moment you saw me," Winifred said. "You said you'd learn not to ignore that feeling. I remember." "Were you right about the knowing?" Jonas thought about the question seriously. "Yes," he said finally. "I was right. But knowing wasn't enough by itself. We still had to do the work. We still had to choose each other every day, especially when it was hard. The knowing just gave us a place to start." Winifred nodded. "I'm glad you started with me." "I'm glad you let me," Jonas said. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that comes from years of partnership and understanding. The night was warm and full of the sounds of their farm, chickens settling, cows lowing softly, the rustle of leaves in the apple trees. "Jonas," Winifred said after a while. "Yes. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for paying the price and doing the work and building this life with me. Thank you for being exactly who you said you would be." Jonas took her hand and raised it to his lips, kissing her scarred fingers gently. "Thank you for choosing me back," he said. "For trusting me when you had every reason not to. For staying when it would have been easier to leave. For being my partner in everything." Winifred leaned her head on his shoulder, and Jonas wrapped his arm around her, and they sat together under the stars in the life they had built. It had been 10 years since Jonas walked into a wedding hall and chose the orc woman instead of his arranged bride. 10 years of work and struggle and determination. 10 years of building something solid and real out of nothing but faith and stubbornness and love. Looking back, Jonas couldn't imagine having made any other choice. Catherine had been right in a way, all those years ago in the preparation hall. Choosing Winifred had cost him everything he had planned for his life. But in return, it had given him everything that actually mattered. Their children sleeping safely in the loft, their farm thriving under their joint care, their love tested and proven and stronger than ever. Their partnership built on mutual respect and shared sacrifice. Their home, modest but truly theirs. Jonas had been a soldier once, trained to make tactical decisions under pressure. He had learned to assess risks and calculate costs and make choices based on strategy rather than emotion. But the best decision of his life had been made in an instant, with no calculation or strategy. Just certainty. Just knowing. He looked at his wife, at the woman who had become his partner in every sense of the word, and felt that certainty as strongly now as he had the day he first saw her. "What are you thinking?" Winifred asked. "That I would do it all again," Jonas said. "Every bit of it. The debt, the work, the struggle. I would walk into that hall 100 times and choose you every single time." Winifred smiled, and in the starlight her eyes shone with tears and love. "Strange man," she said softly. "Strange woman," Jonas replied. She laughed, the sound bright and free, and kissed him there on the porch of the home they had built together. And in that moment, with his wife in his arms and his children safe above them and his life stretched out before him like a gift, Jonas knew he had made the right choice. He had been warned he was there for the wrong bride, and he had chosen the orc woman without hesitating. It was the best decision he had ever made.